what I want to do today is talk about restoring houses, right? Talk about some of the things to do. We'll have a lot of questions and answers and things like that. But before I start, I want to encourage everybody the power and the value of historic houses and historic properties in general. Because if you, there's a lot of bad things being built today, in my opinion, and a lot of ugly houses. And so if you look at the past, and my whole deal is if you look at the past, there's a lot of great lessons that we can learn about how to build better. So we'll talk about that. So I grew up in Dallas, went to Baylor, met my wife. We moved up to Boston and went to this school called the North Bennett Street School. North Bennett Street School is the oldest trade school in the country. It has, I was in a program called Preservation Carpentry. 2-year hands-on. First thing we learned to do is take old hand planes to get them, working again. If you're going to restore or build something from the 1800s, you need to know how to use hand tools to do it. And so it was a whole education about learning how we used to build. And so I was, indoctrinated, drugged, drinking the Kool-Aid now about the value of the craft of the past, the value of how we used to build. And so that's where I got my training, is in Boston. Came back to Texas, started a company called Hull Millwork and Hull Homes. It's two separate companies. It was one company. I started in my brother's garage and was still working in my brother's garage when we did the Hill County Courthouse. And so we have two businesses. I have a building company and I have a millwork company. My building company is all kind of building a new old house, right? Building new houses to feel and look like old houses. And so the great compliment for me and my clients is when they say, someone came up to the door and asked how old my house was, and wondering how long it had been there, and we just finished it, the year before. So that's always a win for me. Why historic houses? So I think that, as I've said, the value of the past, the value of the things from the past are we used to build differently. We'll talk about when that changed. But there was a time when, building the house, you were building it with real things, real wood that lasted a long time. And so I believe today that new houses are disposable. I don't think that they're built to last. And so it's the reason why I love historic houses and want people to restore them properly. So I'm going to just walk you through a number of things that just I want you to, hopefully will encourage you to think differently about, new versus old houses and why old houses rock and new houses don't. So quick quiz. Which one is better designed? The house on the left or that mixer, the KitchenAid mixer, right? Which one is better crafted? I would argue that the KitchenAid mixer for $299 is a better crafted, better designed product than many of our new houses today. That house there, what style is that? What is that? It's not well crafted. It's not built to last. It's not very well designed. And if you ever watch my videos, there's this whole idea that the way we used to design is we designed from the outside in, where the view from the street was very important, the symmetry and everything else. And today, the way houses are designed, they sit down with an architect or a draftsman and they lay out their floor plan. Well, I want a kitchen and I need a master over here. And they lay out the floor plan and then they build the house. And the house ends up with all these bumps and bruises and all these, warts and extensions and everything else. And they aren't designed to be beautiful from the outside. They're designed to be very functional. We also, because of HGTV and everything else, celebrate installation today. Whereas we used to celebrate craft, today, someone installs a door and we go, yay, look what we did, right? Where if you look at how it was done 200 years ago, the craftsman, procured the wood, built the door piece by piece, installed the door, painted the door, put the hardware on, and did everything, versus today where you get pre-hung, pre-finished, pre-hardware door that you put in and you put nailing fins to the studs and you've installed a door, right? So HGTV has glorified demo, and they have glorified installation, and we've lost sight of craft. There is a irony in technology, okay? The world's longest lasting, best built buildings were built during a time of very low technology. So you think of the Parthenon and the Pantheon in Rome, you think about the Gothic cathedrals. There was no power tools, there was no AutoCAD, there was no, none of these things that we have today, and very low technology, these things last a very long time. I think the irony is that as our technology has improved, the length and time of our houses living and standing up is gotten lower and lower. So there's an irony there, and I talk in my book about the irony of tools, that tools get better and better and better and better, and they make our craft get less and less. Talk about the philosophy of kind of how designing a house. So you got two houses there, both production houses, or both built speculatively. On the left, you have a arts and crafts, craftsman style house where all the parts and pieces speak and communicate the same philosophy. And we'll talk about this when we talk about an idea of how to restore your houses. But this idea that there is a philosophical reason for all the parts and pieces on that house. This house is a rejection of Victorianism, a rejection of this kind of overdone ornamentation. The brackets are functional. The brackets, the moldings are very plain and simple. A lot of times the moldings in those houses were stain grade instead of paint grade so that the natural wood could show up. So all of the things that went into a house like that were driven by a philosophy, were driven by a way of thinking, right? Versus the way our houses are built today that are assembled from a bunch of mixed matched parts. There is no philosophical design on that house, right? It is an assembled house. It is no style, right? And so, we have two different ways of building. And again, the great thing about old houses is that we can look at the style and say, what does this house want to be? It's a colonial revival, it's a craftsman, it's a bungalow. And you're going to stay within that philosophical ideal as you go and replace moldings, or you build your kitchen, or you do an addition, right? You can hold on to that philosophy. It really helps quite a bit. Let's just say you're a builder and you have the same, hey, build a mantle, okay? In 1760, that's the Hampton Room at Winter Tour. Anybody been to Winter Tour? The DuPont family home? So Henry DuPont collected American rooms and antiques, and he assembled 175 rooms from 1660 to 1860, all of these houses from all over America inside his house. And so if you go there and you want to see a cross-section of what American interiors look like, go to Winter Tour. It's an amazing place. Anyway, that's the Hampton Room at Winter Tour. It's 1760s. It's from Delaware. And it's an amazing house. But, that mantle was crafted by a craftsman, right? And then, in 2000, the same thing was done. Builder says, craftsman build a mantle. And you have, off-the-shelf parts. There's a sociological comment, art versus our TVs, but why does the builder make the same request, and in one thing we get a mantle that's beautifully proportioned, beautifully crafted, carved elements and things like that, versus what's happening today? Our level of craft has certainly dropped. This is not all going to be just glum bad news, right? This is encouraging, hopefully. There is a narrative to our houses, and what we can learn by looking at the pyramids is, we know everything about the Egyptians because of their pyramids. We know what they believed, we know their technology, we know their governmental structure, we know, essentially everything about them by looking at their buildings. If you take that same lens and look at our buildings, what does it say about us, right? There is a narrative to our homes, okay? And, I can craft a narrative right here, historic neighborhood, new guy comes in, builds this house, right? We all know we don't like that guy, right? That guy is, arrogant, he's showy. It's just, there's a narrative, okay, and there's a story that's being told of our houses and how we're building, and it's very important. And historic houses have charming and wonderful narrative. Where it all starts and where it all kind of tumbles apart is with Levittown. Levittown isn't necessarily a bad place, but it starts the beginning, okay? There are no production builders before 1950, okay? Levittown starts building in 47, 48, and he becomes the model for how houses are built today. So the D.R. Hortons, the Centexes, Lennars, all of those guys, there aren't any of those. And so one reason why pre-1940 houses are better than or more charming, more lovely than post-1940 houses is because of production building. And the majority of houses today are production build house, right? And the problem what happened is, I have a real tough time with Levitt because on everybody heard of William Levitt in Levittown? So Levittown, basically, he was up in New Jersey and he ended up building these houses outside of New York that were very inexpensive, very, very cheap, very small, okay? Levitt's houses were 500 to 600 square feet to start. The average house size in that time was about 1,200 to 1,400 square feet. No garage, slab construction, it was a small, cheap house. But they sold like, hotcakes. It was unbelievable how popular these houses were. Why? Well, part of it was that to have an apartment that you might share a bathroom with another family down the hall for a building. Remember, 1940, Great Depression's 1930, World War II, starts in 41, right? There's about almost a 20-year period where almost no building or very little building is going on. And so apartments weren't updated, weren't, well done. And so when Levitt comes along, he's offering these houses with a washing machine, for $50 a month. They were paying $90 to $100 a month in the cities, and all of a sudden they could go, wait a minute, I can get a house with my own yard, and all of these things. I mean, he had to teach people how to mow the grass. People didn't know how to mow the grass, right? And so, but they could come out and they got so much house for their money that there's stories of him selling 1,000 houses on a weekend, right? And so it was a groundbreaking change. This is when, urban decay happens. This is when the, suburbanation of our country happens. It's all William Levitt and the production builders that start after him. And they're all over the country. William Levitt just becomes the poster child. But what's happened is he teaches generations, 2, 3, 4 generations of builders how to build cheap and fast. Because there's no wood floors, it's plywood floors in these houses. They are, it's the same design over and over again. You ever wonder, when the term cookie cutter houses started, right? This is when that happened because in New Jersey and in Philadelphia, you had 4 and then 5 house styles. Pick one, right? And so that's when this all starts. And the degradation of our housing stock and the uglyification of our houses happens after this time, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? The low point in American building history for design is 1970. So things begin to improve after that. The consequences of production building, hyper-focus on cost and speed instead of quality. Craft and design is discouraged, right? And so, anyway, there's a whole nother talk, but I just wanted to talk about what happens, a world without a past, a world without craft, a world, ends up, everything looks the same. It's just ugly, right? And so the joy and the wonder of having a historic house is, hopefully you're holding on to your house right now going, I got a pretty good house, right? And you're not saying, oh, my house is drafty, oh, my house is this. We can fix those things, okay? You can't buy charm today. It's costs more. And so this really does have value. The people ask me, well, if you had, $100,000 or $500,000 or whatever a house costs today, what would you do? What would you buy? I would buy an old house, it's not even close. The money, because you get real wood moldings, you get your real wood on the outside, you get products and materials that have already been there 100 years that should last another 100 years with maintenance. So, all right. Usually the first thing I tell people is do you have any original pictures? Documentation and finding out kind of what was there is so important. So we'll talk about sleuthing, we'll talk about what that looks like. Talk about historic precedent, what that means, and adding on and doing things that are part of that precedent. Talk about the right materials. I know we want to talk about materials, we'll do that. And then energy efficiency, we'll spend a lot of time there about healthy houses and just kind of what that means and everything else. One of the first things I learned at North Bennett Street was that everything dates itself, okay? We would take moldings off the wall and look to see what kind of nails there was, whether it was a wrought nail, whether it was a cut nail, whether it was a wire nail, whether it was a nail gun nail, right? A pin nail, because all of those things date themselves. And the smoke mirrors, conversation pits that we grew up with, everything dates itself. Siding on the house. And so this house that we're doing in Granbury right now is an 1881 house. And those posts in the front of the house had been, I didn't trust some of the moldings, okay? I was like looking at that molding, I was like, that doesn't look right. And we'd take it off and there'd be a small crown molding that someone had done later. Or we'd look at the wood quality and we'd say, oh, this wood is finger jointed, right? Finger joint wood is a post-1950s thing, 1970s thing, really. And so everything dates itself. And so as you're thinking about your house and as you're looking around trying to figure out what's original, what isn't, they're all dating clues for me, and they all tell a story. Okay, and we talked about that narrative about how they were going to be made. So, one, the first thing, if you hired me and I came out, the first thing I say is I want original pictures. I want any original data you've got, any original things that are going to show me the way things used to look, because old houses can be really confusing. If you've got an 1890s house and someone did a kitchen in 1920, you may not have the eye to know that that's a 1920s kitchen, not an 1890s kitchen. So, how do you do that? How do you know? One, it takes practice, but two, you can, if you've lived in your house 40 years, you can start to begin to peel these things back. Nails is the easiest clue, okay? Because, a square nail in Texas, right? We don't have any wrought nails. Wrought nails would be a handmade nail. That's usually before 1820. So cut nails last until about the 1890s. That's why in this 1880 house we're working on, we've got a lot of cut nails in framing and trim and everything. And we can pretty quickly know if there's a wire nail in it, okay, because wire nails are after 1890, we know that isn't original. So peeling moldings off, looking at the nails, pretty quickly we know what's original, what isn't, okay? The wood quality, okay? And wood in general. In Texas, before 1940, really, maybe if you want to say 1920, it's longleaf pine. Okay, almost everywhere. There's a little bit of cypress you might see in some windows and things like that, but everything's longleaf pine. So if you've got a white pine molding in your house, it's most likely not original, because we didn't have white pine here. And so it's all been local materials and local things that would have built our houses. And so taking moldings off the wall, I would encourage you, hey, is that base original? I don't know, let's look at it. Peel it off, slowly, carefully pry it off, see what kind of wood it is. That's one of the big clues. So any kind of historical documentation you can get. The challenge we're having on this house is there's a porch railing and there's moldings around the thing, around the windows that are weird, and you don't build that way. And what were they thinking? Well, it calms you down pretty quickly when you look at an historic photo and that's the way it originally was. And you're like, okay, never seen that before. I've learned something, this is great. But without that documentation, I would have been peeling back the wood trying to figure out what was going on here. So that historical thing is maybe the most important thing of finding out what the original story of the house is. So historic precedent, okay? I talk a lot about historic precedent with with our jobs, because what I'm trying to do is, for a kitchen, for an addition, there is a way. This is a 1920s house. It's a 28. It's a colonial revival house in Fort Worth, built by a very famous architect named John Staub. There are ways that we're approaching. These had original operable shutters that cranked from the inside, that the shutters open and close. Very unique, very unique, very rare. We were, because it's been built by an architect, because it's been designed, we've got documentation to know with this architect how he used to build. And it established a standard for us of how we were going to go back, and the additions and the kitchens and the other things that we did in this house. He had established some historic precedent, okay, that this is the way we need to go back, this is how we need to build. And so if anybody's doing a kitchen, right, it's very difficult to get a good historic kitchen today without getting custom cabinets made. And so, there's a detail in historic kitchens that happens really before 1950, that all kitchens, or 90% of kitchens, the door fit into the face frame of the cabinet. They were inset doors, okay? Well, ever heard of the European hinges with the kitchens? The European hinge is called a European hinge because after World War II, when they were rebuilding Europe, the European hinge was developed as a faster way to build cabinets. So it is the hinge that mounts on the inside of your cabinet, and in most cases, in a lot of cases, the cabinet door overlays and sits on top of the frame of the cabinet. And so this is called an overlay door. Well, real quickly, if we look at the past, we go like, well, if you're going to build an historic kitchen, because these kitchens, 80% of the walls will be covered in cabinets, getting the cabinets right is huge. And if you don't get that cabinet door set into an inset frame, you immediately signal the fact that it's a new kitchen, that you're not following precedent. And so there's little geeky things like that looking at the past and being a student of the past can help you make better decisions. Because there's nothing worse than walking through a charming, 1920s bungalow and then walking into a kitchen and thinking you're in Plano, or you're like, where am I? Okay, and so that narrative, that story, right, that you walk through these houses and you know where you are, you know the time and place, the beadboard walls they put in here, right? That's a historic fabric, historic material that defines a period sometimes. And so some of those things are really important. Additions, I would say that the whole key there is scale. Is that you do not, let's say your bungalow is 1,800 square feet and you need another 1,000 feet. That doesn't mean you put a 1,000-foot box on the back of your house, right? There is a scale to those rooms as you walk through there, and if you walk into a big open warehouse space, you're all of a sudden somewhere else. And so there is a scale to the size of those rooms and things like that and matching materials and everything else that need to be carefully managed in order to have success. I'm on a thing called the Build Show Network, okay? The Build Show Network is a collection of builders and craftsmen who are teaching about building. And there's this whole concept called build science. Anybody heard of build science? So build science is that if we make our houses as energy efficiency as possible, you can have these net zero houses. You ever heard that term? So net zero is basically, you have no energy bills. And sometimes with solar or some of these other energy things, you can actually, your house can make money, right? That's not the goal. The goal is this net zero, that you don't have any energy bills because your house is so efficient, okay? So that's, in the last probably 15, 20 years, that's become kind of a big deal. The problem is that when build science is applied to historic houses and trying to make them efficient and airtight and everything else, it doesn't work. And a lot of times the reason we have mold in our houses is because someone's tried to make it airtight and they were never designed to be airtight, okay? So the biggest bang for your buck going away from this talk, if you hear anything, it's that insulation is the best, bang for your buck as far as making your house energy efficient. Quick math, I can probably get, insulation blown into my house for less than, $6,000 or $8,000. If I try to replace all my windows in my house, let's just say it's a 1920s bungalow with 30 windows, you're looking at least $50,000 if you're going back with a wood window, okay? And so if you're going back with the cheap aluminum, I wouldn't recommend that. You're still going to spend more money than that. And so bang for the buck, insulation is no doubt the best. Now the problem is that there's a lot of insulation products out there that you don't want to use. And I think I said in one of my slides, please do not use foam in your house, okay? If you've blown foam in it, there's going to be consequences of that we can talk about, but foam is a terrible product in a historic house. Everybody seen the foam things that people put in new houses? It's terrible. And so what you want, remember the big picture, the enemy is water, okay? The enemy of our old houses with roofs and foundations, the first thing you should repair is the roof. Second thing is make sure your foundation can be dry, right? That isn't collecting water, that water isn't running through it, that your grade doesn't, go like this and your house is here and the water is falling up against your house. So the foundation and roof are the most important things. Next would be getting your insulation right. Now, when we build new houses, this is a little more background, there's now an energy code that you have to pass. And the energy code is that your house has to have, and this is true in most regions, it is in Fort Worth and Dallas, it has to pass a energy efficiency code. So they're now putting blower doors on houses. Have you ever seen those blower door things? So the blower door, what it does is it creates a negative pressure in your house and it measures the amount of air cycles through your house would go through and how fast air is moving through your house. So the code in our area is 3 ACH per minute, or not per minute, air exchange per hour. So is 3, okay? That means your house is tight. That means you're not pulling a lot of air through your house. When we go into a new house, we have to close up the chimney, typically the closing plumbing vents, things like that. And they turn on this blower and it tests. An historic house would probably get an ACH of 8, okay? Pretty inefficient. Now, the deal is that insulation probably doesn't become a common in housing until the 50s or 60s, okay? You can find insulation in the 40s. Sometimes you'll see a rock wool or something like that in the 20s and 30s, but it's pretty rare. So if you have a pre-1940 house and it hasn't been updated, you probably have no insulation in your walls at least. Sometimes it's been blown into the attic. You can do, huge things. My 1940s house that we were living in, I just was learning about build science, and I remember I blew cellulose insulation in my attic, and my AC would kick off at, would kick on at 10 in the morning, 9 in the morning in the middle of the summer, and not kick off till like 2 or 3 in the morning, right? It was always running, trying to keep the house cool. And when I blew cellulose in the attic, I remember walking in the door while the guys were still up there, and this cold air hit me, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is, unbelievable. Now, my house hadn't been insulated, so blowing insulation in made a huge difference. But you need to get the right type of insulation. And so there's one called cellulose, okay? And cellulose is basically paper that has been treated with borates and other things. It is non-flammable and it's very dense. It does not allow air movement through the house, okay? The other one's called rock wool, okay, or mineral wool, okay? Those two are the only insulation that I really recommend. Fiberglass insulation I don't think is very good, and foam insulation is terrible. Foam is terrible because it basically can trap water in your walls and it won't let it out. Cellulose and rock wool, if it gets wet, can dry out. Foam, if it gets wet, doesn't dry out. It's like a wet sponge in your wall, okay? So that's a big problem. And so if Matt Reisinger, who started the Build Show, was talking about how he worked up in Portland and they would blow foam insulation to their house, and they would start having mold problems immediately. And they were like, why are we having mold problems? Well, the advantage of foam is that it does create an a vapor barrier that air can't move through. The bad thing about it is that air can't move through it, it doesn't dry out, and it causes mold. So the mold problem that we have in houses is really only about 20 years old. When did foam start coming around? About 20 years ago, right? And so I don't like foam for a number of reasons. It expands. It can actually take the boards off the side of your house. When it expands, it does a lot of things. But I think I've beaten this dead horse enough. Don't use foam, okay? All right, so windows. And I get the same flyers from Anderson Renewal and all the different companies, saying, change your windows, change your windows, change your windows. Basically, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, came out in 2012, sued about 6 or 8 window companies for lying about energy efficiency of windows, okay? They basically said that you can save 50% on your energy bills if you replace your windows. Really, it's about 1 to 4%, okay? And this has been verified and backed up, Department of Energy and everything else. And so the idea that you can, take out that window and expect to see an energy bill change is just, it's crazy. And it's a lie. It's the reason why they sued them. And so when we talk about windows, I want to show you some graphs and show you some things to help you understand why this is the case. All right, so first graph is energy use, okay? So your energy bill, okay, it's broken up into all of these different categories. Only about 30 to 40% is happening, where's my numbers? Space cooling and space heating, so what is that, 42%, right, is spent on AC, okay, or heat, trying to heat and cool your house. So of the $100, only 42 of it is spent doing that. The others is refrigeration, lighting, all the different things that are going on. Energy loss, only about, I can't read it on the wall behind me, only about 10% of your energy loss goes out windows, okay? Now you may sit there and go, well, that's not my house because I sat by my window and I could feel the air coming through it, right? And so I get it. The deal is that most of the energy loss goes out walls and ceilings, okay? And so realizing that, next slide, realizing that only 40% of your energy bill is spent on heating and cooling and about 10% of it is lost in windows and doors, it's the reason why it takes 40 to 120 years, 100 years to have a recoup by changing out the windows and expecting to see an energy bill savings. Here's the deal, okay? In Texas, okay, we have a heat gain problem, okay? We don't have a heat loss problem, okay? Insulated glass stops heat loss, okay? It doesn't help with heat gain. It helps a little bit because they got a low E coating on there, but you can get that in another way. But we don't need insulated glass in Texas. Our median temperature in Fort Worth is 68 degrees. And so, yes, we have some cold days in the winter, but on whole, it doesn't matter. So, yes, you can do interior storms. Yes, it will help with air infiltration, okay? It won't help with heat gain, okay? And so heat gain needs to be blocked with either a film or UV or a low E coating or something like that to stop heat gain. That's our challenge. So if you got a house with trees, if you got a house with big overhangs, right, and you don't have a lot of heat gain coming in your windows, you're probably okay. Another reason why insulation can pay so well and such a big bang for your buck, and it's not windows where that savings happens. I just wanted to show, this is a house, this was actually the first house I bought in Texas. It's a 1930s bungalow. We counted out, it was about 1,500 square feet. And we just did the math, okay? So you got 1,500 square feet on the ceiling, 1,500 square feet in the floor, and then I think we figured we had about another 1,000 square feet of surface area in the walls on the outside. It ended up being that the total square footage of exposed exterior walls was like, was just, let's just say it was 1,000, 1,500, about 4,200 square feet. The amount, and then we counted up the number of windows, right, around the house and did the square footage of those, and it ended up being like 350 square feet, okay? So again, another metric to kind of put your mind around this thing. You've got exposed exterior walls of about 4,500 square feet. You've got about even if we were saying our math's wrong, let's double it. Let's say it was 500 or 600 square feet. You're still in that 10 to 12% of exterior exposed walls that, to expect to change those windows out and see a savings, it just doesn't make sense. I think actually one of the best architectural salvage yards in Texas is in Fort Worth. It's called Old Home Supply. Ralph has been the very first historic millwork catalog I ever got was from Ralph. I asked him, I was like, what would carpenters have looked at in 1920 if they wanted to order a stair or a kitchen? He goes, here's a book. And so Ralph's incredibly knowledgeable. He's got 4 stores, an old Piggly Wiggly. They're in Fairmount, which is an historic district in Fort Worth. But I've asked around, there's not really a great one in Dallas. I don't know if there's one in Waxahachie, but Ralph's the best around. There's another great resource you guys need to know about. It's called traditionalbuilding.com. Okay, write that down. Traditionalbuilding.com. Basically, they have a buying guide in there, and if you want lighting, if you want, doors, windows, hardware, anything for an old house, it's in that buying guide. And so, if you're looking for resources of where some of those things are coming from, there are a collection of companies that provide historically inspired products for Victorians, for arts and crafts, for everything. They're very small, little companies that do these custom, beautiful things, tile. Essentially anything for an old house is in those buying guides that you can look it up and see. So traditionalbuilding.com, check that out. Well, I'll be around and answer any other questions, but thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.